Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into some fascinating sources that all circle around one big question. Can we really get to truly ethical AI just by following rules and ticking boxes?
Yeah, it's a huge topic right now.
And the sources we've looked at, they basically argue no. They're saying moral philosophy isn't just some, academic add-on.
No, it's essential, like a core tool needed for ethical design.
So our mission today is to unpack why just sticking to technical compliance, say, like the EU's requirements for trustworthy AI often fall short.
Right, it often just scratches the surface.
We tend to think, oh, we could just audit this.
Yeah.
Right? Check the boxes, make sure it meets the spec.
Mm.
But the research suggests that's only dealing with the very tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
There are deeper conceptual flaws that checklists just don't catch.
Exactly. It's fundamentally the difference between, say, doing what's legally required and doing what's morally right. Technical compliance gives you that standardized check. But that standardization often completely misses the hidden moral assumptions baked into the design from the start. That's where the real gap is.
Okay, let's unpack that. Because the sources give some pretty stark examples where compliance just wasn't enough. And these aren't small things.
Yeah, definitely not.
We're talking about things like algorithmic hiring tools, the ones that end up showing really clear bias.
Yeah, perpetuating old discriminatory patterns, because that's what was in the historical data they learned from.
Or facial recognition.
Hmm.
Big differences in accuracy depending on someone's gender or race.
Yeah.
The system passes the technical checks for some groups, but fails badly for others.
And those failures show you can't just boil down ethical alignment to a number, to some statistical benchmark or a simple pass-fail test.
Right.
The failure isn't just a technical glitch, it's a moral failure. It comes from the fact that the basic assumptions like, what even is good data here? Or what's the best outcome we're aiming for? Those questions weren't really examined through a philosophical lens at the start.
And that's exactly why the sources argue philosophy is better suited for this than a checklist. A checklist basically confirms, did you follow steps A, B, and C?
Procedural.
But a philosophical inquiry goes deeper, right? It asks why step A, what assumptions are behind it. It can actually uncover those hidden moral judgments that shape the technology.
Like with the hiring tools you mentioned.
Yeah. They keep repeating bias because they're trained on data that reflects biased hiring from the past. The hidden assumption is that past performance is a fair predictor for the future role.
Which is a huge, often unexamined moral assumption. And your standard technical audit is probably not going to flag that kind of conceptual problem.
So the core idea is, ethical alignment isn't like solving a math problem where you hit a specific number and you're done.
Not at all. It has to be more nuanced, iterative, really sensitive to the actual harms people might experience in the real world and the context they're in.
So if you only focus on, say, a technical definition of fairness inside the model,
you completely mull the bigger picture, the history, the social context that produced the data in the first place.
This seems to lead right into another big issue the sources raise: timing. When does ethics actually come into the picture?
Yeah, this is a huge practical problem. Very often, ethics is treated like quality assurance almost. It comes in late in the development cycle.
Like a final check.
Exactly. A slow, backward-looking audit. But by that point, the fundamental architecture, the choices about data, maybe even really skewed representation in the data sets, that's all locked in.
And trying to fix it then is what? Harder? More expensive?
Both. It's super inefficient, and sometimes you just can't fix the foundational flaws without starting over.
Okay, so if checking at the end is too little too late, what's the alternative? Building it in from the start.
That's the core argument, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
The sources propose that when you actually embed the concepts, the models, even the vocabulary of moral philosophy deep into the AI system's architecture, then ethics stops being this external thing you bolt on. It becomes an actual functioning feature of the system itself.
Built in, not bolted on.
Precisely. And that structural approach is vital because, static ethical rules don't work well in the real world.
Why not? Things change too fast.
Exactly. Social values evolve, norms shift, and these AI systems constantly run into new situations, edge cases that a fixed rulebook written, 3 years ago just can't anticipate or handle well.
So we need something more flexible.
Yes, something the sources call contextual morality.
Contextual morality. Okay, so that means what? Ethics specific to the situation?
Basically, yeah. You can't just have one universal ethical code for all AI. You need moral frameworks that are tailored to the specific use case.
Like how it's actually being used.
Yeah. And where it's being used. Responsive to the specific social and cultural context. It sounds like more work, and it probably is.
But necessary, you're saying.
It seems to be, because the sources point out that different people prioritize ethics differently based on their background. Think about it. A manager in, say, Japan versus an engineer in Germany versus a user in the US.
They might have very different ideas about data privacy or acceptable risk.
Absolutely. So a single universal framework is almost guaranteed to fail some of those contexts. It just doesn't map onto that diversity of values.
Okay, so this model sounds much more dynamic and needs to adapt, maybe incorporating feedback.
Yes, real-time user feedback is mentioned as crucial. It emphasizes the need for ongoing dialogue, constant conversation between the designers, the developers, the managers, and especially the people who will actually use or be affected by the system.
So everyone involved helps define what's responsible for that specific use case and helps it adapt over time.
Exactly. It's a much more grounded approach.
Which leads us away from something the sources criticize quite heavily, this idea of technocratic abstraction. Now that sounds like pretty dense terminology.
It does, but the concept is pretty straightforward, actually.
Okay, break it down for us.
It's basically when developers, often unintentionally, overlook the messy reality of where their AI will be used. They take a complex, sensitive human situation. Maybe it's deciding on healthcare access or a loan application.
High-stakes stuff.
Right, and they reduce it down to just an optimization problem, something neat and tidy that can be solved with an algorithm, stripping away all the context.
Simplifying too much.
Way too much, and that abstraction, that simplification, is where moral failures can creep in. Philosophical thinking, the sources argue, is specifically good at spotting and resisting that kind of harmful reductionism. It forces you to keep the bigger picture in view.
So when you ignore the context because you're focused only on the tech problem, what goes wrong? The sources mentioned three main issues.
Yeah, three major conceptual problems that pure engineering often struggles with. But before I list them, maybe address the elephant in the room.
Which is?
Does bringing in philosophy just slow everything down? Isn't it just adding academic layers to what's fundamentally an engineering task? Will it stifle innovation?
That's a fair question. People worry about that.
Totally understandable. But what the research suggests is that this conceptual work upfront actually makes the final AI system more robust and less likely to cause harm later. You avoid costly fixes and scandals down the line.
So pay now or pay more later, basically.
Kind of, yeah. And these three problems really illustrate why. The first one is ignoring context and unintended consequences.
Okay.
When you oversimplify, you miss things. Crucial things like privacy rights or how the data was collected or just the lack of real-world understanding in the data itself.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine designing, say, an automated traffic management system. Purely optimizing for traffic flow might sound good, but if you don't consider the social context, maybe your system ends up disproportionately increasing surveillance or policing in lower-income neighborhoods just because that's mathematically optimal for flow. That's a failure to apply, say, political philosophy to see the real-world impact beyond the numbers.
Got it. Okay, what's the second problem?
The second one is data misuse.
Misuse. How?
Well, in that technocratic view, data often gets treated just like raw material, an input, interchangeable bits and bytes.
Right.
But you lose sight of the fact that this data often comes from real people, represents aspects of their lives, and was likely shared under certain assumptions of trust or a specific purpose, a sort of social contract.
And when you treat it just technical stuff?
Then your solutions to problems are purely technical too. Like, oh, the model is biased, let's just retrain it on slightly different data.
But that doesn't fix the original problem.
Often not. Retraining might tweak the output, but it doesn't address whether using that data in that way was okay in the first place. Did it violate the trust? Did it ignore the ethical context under which the data was given? Technical fixes alone can't really grapple with those wider social issues of autonomy and privacy.
Okay, that makes sense. And the third problem area?
The third one is reliance on questionable proxies.
Proxies. Like stand-ins for what you actually want to measure.
Exactly. Machine learning often uses input variables, proxies, to predict something else, something harder to measure directly. Maybe it's predicting job success or creditworthiness.
Things that are complex human qualities.
Right. And the sources stress that technical teams can easily fall into the trap of picking proxies that seem convenient or available without rigorously justifying why that proxy is actually a good or fair stand-in for the real thing.
Like using someone's zip code as a proxy for, I don't know, financial responsibility.
That's a classic example. And that's where philosophy demands more rigor. If you use zip code, a technical input, as a stand-in for financial responsibility, which is an ethical concept, philosophy forces you to explain why. What's the justification? Is that link valid? Is it fair?
And technical teams might just skip that justification step.
Sometimes, yes. The proxy works statistically in the model, so it gets used, becoming an unexamined, embedded moral assumption. Philosophical thinking demands you make that justification explicit and defend it. It requires accountability.
Okay, so if we do bring in moral philosophy early, if we build it in, what does that look like in practice? What features does the system or the design process actually gain?
Well, the sources point to 3 key features that enable this contextual morality we talked about. First, you get transparency.
Making the assumptions visible.
Exactly. It fights against that abstraction problem. Second, you get participatory processes.
Meaning involving more people, users, community.
Yes, essential for getting that use case specific design right, for having that dialogue. And third, you get adaptive processes.
So the system can change.
Right. It allows the system to evolve as the context changes, as social norms shift, instead of being locked into its original design forever.
Okay, transparency, participation, adaptation. But how do you actually do that? What are the organizational tools?
Good question. It's not just about thinking differently. You need mechanisms. The sources suggest 3 practical tools. First, audit trails.
Like cracking decisions.
Detailed tracking and explanation, especially for high-stakes decisions made by the AI, so you can understand why it did what it did. Second, localized value alignment.
Going beyond general principles.
Yes, this is crucial for context. It means actively checking and aligning the system's behavior with the specific values of the community where it's being used. Think about data sharing norms for health information that can vary hugely between countries.
So you need to tailor it locally, not just globally.
Exactly. It moves beyond generic compliance to actually matching the ethical priorities on the ground.
And the third tool?
The third one is really vital: feedback loops.
Getting input back from users.
Yes, especially real-time user feedback. That's seen as paramount for keeping the AI aligned as things change, particularly in really dynamic social situations. The system needs to learn and adapt based on ongoing experience.
And who gives this feedback? Who participates?
This is key. The sources strongly emphasize engaging with all the stakeholders, and critically, that includes groups who are often marginalized or might be disproportionately affected by the AI.
Why is their input so important?
It's not just about fairness or appearing transparent, although that's part of it. Those groups often have unique perspectives that can reveal ethical risks or structural flaws that the developers or maybe the dominant user group would completely miss otherwise. Their involvement is essential for genuinely uncovering hidden problems.
Okay, that covers how philosophy helps AI. But you mentioned a twist. The relationship goes the other way, too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting symbiotic relationship. We've focused on how moral philosophy can improve AI development, but AI and computation are also starting to enhance moral philosophy itself.
How does computation help philosophy?
It's mainly through this field called computational ethics, using formal tools like automated theorem provers.
Theorem provers. Like in logic and math.
Exactly. These tools demand incredible precision. They're being used to analyze complex moral arguments with a level of logical rigor that was basically impossible before.
Wait, so you're saying a computer program can check Kant's homework?
Sort of. It forces philosophers to be incredibly precise, to analyze, say, arguments about free will or moral responsibility from historical texts. You have to translate those often quite complex, sometimes ambiguous concepts into formal logic, into axioms the machine can understand.
So it forces clarity.
Immense clarity. The theorem prover can then check the logical consistency of the argument. Does it follow? Are there hidden contradictions? It's incredibly powerful for finding weaknesses or inconsistencies in very complex chains of reasoning.
So it's not creating new philosophy, but refining existing arguments.
Primarily, yes. It also helps formalize tricky metaphysical concepts, things like existence, possibility, identity, time. By making the logical steps explicit and machine verifiable, it shows exactly where an argument might be weak or flawed.
That's fascinating. A tool for sharpening philosophical thinking itself.
Definitely. Though it's worth noting, these are mostly gains within philosophy right now. An AI engineer building a practical system might not see the immediate day-to-day benefit for their work.
Still, the two-way street is clear. New tech like AI throws up urgent new moral questions about things like algorithmic bias, job automation, mass surveillance.
Right, huge societal challenges.
And moral philosophy gives us the conceptual tools to try and tackle those challenges thoughtfully.
But at the same time, the computational tools born from tech are helping to make philosophical analysis itself more rigorous and precise.
It's a loop. Technology poses moral questions, philosophy helps answer them, and computation sharpens the philosophy.
That sums up the symbiotic relationship really well.
So if there's one key takeaway for you listening, it seems to be this. Truly ethical AI isn't just about meeting technical specs or following compliance rules.
Yeah.
You need deeper conceptual tools.
You need to ask those philosophical questions about context, about assumptions, about justifications before you even start coding, ideally. Look under the hood of the metrics.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe a provocative question for you to chew on.
Yeah, something to think about after this. If we accept this idea that ethical alignment isn't static, that it has to be dynamic, adaptive, constantly learning from feedback and changing values, then what parts of our current system, our existing company structures, our legal frameworks, which are mostly built for that old model of static, measurable compliance, what parts of that are now actually getting in the way? What's the biggest hurdle preventing us from developing AI that is genuinely adaptively ethical?